What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Overwatch League Report. I'm your host, Timur, filling in for Brian, who is absent yet again. But I do have Ben with me. How's it going, Ben?
It's pretty good. We're getting ready to head into the Stage 3 playoffs, the last stage playoffs of the season before we transition into our final stage here and then into our season playoffs in a couple of months.
Yeah, it's really exciting. This last weekend, we were at the Atlanta homestead, and Atlanta killed it. I mean, I feel like there's something to be said about teams playing on their own home turf, and there's like a better chance of them doing well on their own home turf, and it kind of makes you wonder where the sport or the esport is going long term, if this is something that would happen each week if we were to play in different locations and different home turfs. Maybe the standings would be totally different.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting next season if and when we do get these more consistent home games, whether there is some kind of home field advantage for these teams that have the audience behind them cheering for them with the same energy that we've seen in these two homestands that they've done.
Yeah, totally. So I do want to talk about Atlanta because they really did kill it. I mean, their first game was against Toronto, which they went 3-1, and I do think this is the case where they were building off of the audience. The audience was just so wild; it almost felt even more powerful than Dallas, which Dallas was like pretty rowdy, but Atlanta was like intense. And yeah, it was kind of interesting. They played Fried over Daco. I feel like that may have, gone toward their wins. What do you think?
I mean, Daco is crazy, and I mean he's had like a couple of hiccups here and there, but I mean, I can't imagine that they would have had any trouble with either of their matches if they had Daco in instead. In fact, I think they might have looked at Fried as kind of more of a like marketable face for the homestand, maybe, or maybe Daco's kind of had issues before with not like culturally gelling well with the team, or like sharing some kind of opinion about how their team is run. So maybe that he benched himself. Maybe he was benched for a number of reasons, or if they wanted Fried to have some play time on the stage in front of fans against two relatively uneventful teams that they were playing against here in Toronto and Florida. Toronto and Florida.
Yeah, Florida. I should mention they went 4-0 against Florida, which I feel like is unsurprising, but. Yeah, I think you're right. It could be a case of they just wanted to throw Fried up there because, they knew these were going to be fairly easy wins, and they kind of just wanted to give him some time and take him off the bench. But we did see a few, switches in these teams and their players. Interestingly, for example, Shanghai played Envy over Youngjin, and I mean, Envy did look a little bit underwhelming. And maybe that's why Shanghai lost to Guangzhou Charge, who had an actually really good weekend. Yeah, what did you think? What did you think of that match?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the most interesting match of the week in hindsight, or the weekend in hindsight, because every other match kind of went the way that you probably would have predicted going in. Or like we kind of mentioned last week coming in, there was these, there were like 3 strong teams and then like 5 weaker teams. When you have these like matchups of like strong teams, like, Florida versus Excelsior is never going to be an interesting match. You know what I mean? Or like Washington versus Philly, even though they did take a map off them. Like, so the fact that the Charge were able to come out and win both of their matches, like obviously, winning very dominantly against Washington on Sunday, but beating Shanghai, a team who are in the Stage 3 playoffs, is very impressive and definitely shows a lot of capability for them, potentially sneaking their way into this play-in bracket if they perform well in stage 4. They've been a very on and off team. They had a very notable loss streak about 2 months ago, and a map loss streak, especially because they lost like 23 or 24 maps in a row or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean they started this weekend putting in Nero as this kind of like third DPS slot, which is something a lot of teams have been doing, is playing 3 DPS and 1 tank, or playing a second tank that can flex to DPS roles such as Sombra. And they played Nero on roles like Genji and Roadhog, and played kind of some creative compositions. And while I would say that there were maps in this match that Shanghai kind of lost more so than the Charge won, they definitely played above average compared to what they have in the past. And I'm excited to see if they can continue.
Yeah, definitely. We did see actually a bunch of Roadhog this weekend, which was interesting. And I do think Nero on the Roadhog definitely, contributed to their win. And, it's sad to see Shanghai get beat. They're one of my favorite teams. But fortunately, they did still make it to the playoffs because they did beat Philly in their Sunday match, which I think we said last weekend that this was going to be our most interesting match. And it was, in some ways it was pretty interesting. I mean, we had Carpe versus Diem, Widow duels. That was like really cool. But besides that, Carpe kind of was underwhelming on Zarya. I don't know. What did you think of the match?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely the most impactful match of the week, given that both of these teams were kind of fighting for that last spot in the playoffs. With Shanghai losing to the Charge, this was a win and you're in type situation where if Philly had beaten Shanghai, Philly would have been in the stage 3 playoffs instead of them. So it definitely was the most high stakes game of the weekend. And yeah, I think something we've talked about pretty periodically throughout much of stage 3 with Philly has just kind of been like a sense of underperforming, where they have so much talent. This is a team that was in the grand finals last season. Carpe and EQO, like these are players that are crazy in their roles. Boombox is phenomenal flex support, probably somewhere in the like 5 to 10 range in terms of like if you were to rank the flex supports in the league. And yeah, it's Poco, obviously, the famous Poco bombs, and he had a few of those this weekend.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, a lot of people have pointed out Sato as being kind of their weak link. I would definitely say in GOATs, Carpe has, as you mentioned, not performed super well on the Zarya. He is still a great Widowmaker player and a great sniper and DPS player when he gets to play that role. But even still, when they were playing kind of more Orisa-focused compositions and later maps against Shanghai, they were still not performing super well. And Shanghai had their issues where Envy has been kind of playing the Sombra role in maps where they want to have the option to flex him onto Diva, and then they play Youngjin in other maps when they want to play either a consistent Sombra Goats with the ding on the Sombra instead. So it's like it's tricky. I think the Shanghai has like these weird like they have a dichotomy now. They're either playing like DPS comp with Envy in so they can play Ding on generally Pharah, or they're playing Youngjin in so they can play primarily Goats and then flex to DPS with Ding on Sombra. Like those are their two kind of like separate compositions that they're running, and they've seen some success on both, but Envy did underwhelm me on Sombra, but he is also the newest member of the team, and he's still probably trying to integrate in terms of just like the team environment and like chemistry and stuff like that.
Yeah, and being on the big stage with such a huge audience, I can totally see that. But like you said, it is a little bit. It's a little sad to see Philly lose in such a way. And to your point, I mean, this is something that's just coming to mind for me, where like you said, Shanghai has this flexibility, and they seem to have this plan of how to approach each map, whereas Philly, and it doesn't seem specific to Philly, but I want to connect this also to last year's grand finals with London. These teams who establish such a strong six maybe don't have the they're not as willing to play around with their roster because these are like their all stars. I mean, London has been playing a little bit here and there with like Quartermain, and they have been doing well since then. But I mean, you look at Philly, and it's like I think as sad as it would be to see Carpe on the bench, if they had a stronger Zarya or someone who, at least when they tried to play goats, just to fill in, I think they would do a lot better.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem like they have that flexibility at this point. And even if you look at like a team like Vancouver, who have played Stitch in either with or instead of Somensu, so they can kind of mess around with different compositions if they want to. So yeah, I think it is definitely a weakness in Philadelphia, where they are kind of just like locked into this starting six, and they kind of have to build their strategy around their players more so than like fit players to a strategy.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about some of the other matches this week. So NYXL won both their matches unsurprisingly because they went 3-0 against Florida and 4-0 against Toronto. And I guess at face value, this is NYXL, one of the best teams in the league, and it's to be expected that they would beat these lower tier teams. But I do think it's worth mentioning during the Toronto game, we did see Toronto play out or pull out the Clockwork Vendetta composition, and they held Havana at the first point, which to me I was not expecting. They looked pretty strong, and it looked like New York didn't know how to handle it. This is like kind of something new to us. It's like New York scrambling around to like figure out how to beat this composition and switching off characters and such. And then of course like the next round, New York comes back they pull out the Bastion and hold them even sooner on point one on Havana. So in the end, they still won 4-0. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting how we see the Clockwork Vendetta meta really working for like Toronto. Yeah, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, you could just like talking about Clockwork Vendetta. Like they kind of came out of nowhere. They've had this like meteoric rise when they found their way into EU contenders a month or so ago. People like thought that it was a meme and they were just going to get rolled by these like better teams who have been playing together for way longer, have more of an established base, are playing what people thought to be the stronger compositions in the meta. But Clockwork Vendetta are number one with a bullet right now in EU contenders, and they're still playing their wacky composition. They're making a few adjustments here and there, but they're still killing people with Torbjorn and May. I mean,
exactly.
And I think that some of these teams in Owl might be able to adjust themselves and try and utilize this composition like we saw Toronto do. I think that we might see some more of this in stage 4. It'll be interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
maybe just for people who don't know, can you talk a little bit about the composition?
Yeah, so the standard composition for Clockwork Vendetta is Orisa, Roadhog, Torbjorn, May, and then for the last two, either a Sniper plus Mercy or some combination of Ana, Zen, Mercy, if you want to play 2 supports instead of just the solo heal Mercy. So Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's as we saw with Toronto. I think they played with a Widowmaker. It's usually a Widowmaker or a Hanzo in that last role if they
Yeah.
want to play the 3 DPS solo heal version. And it's just like, a lot of crowd control with May Freeze, with the Torb ult. You have Roadhog having crazy crowd control with the Halt Hook with Orisa. And, just like, it's basically doing what you said that it did to New York, which is just like, it like, takes whatever, setup you have going and you think you have this plan, you're going in, and it's just like, goes like this to it, and you're like,
Yeah.
what's going on?
Yeah.
It's like chaos. It's like chaos is a ladder, the composition.
Yeah, definitely. There was like a moment where, they were Toronto was throwing out all these alts, and it was like everything was just falling apart. It was so insane. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you'd have like the tour ball, and then it's like okay, but they can keep going. They can like kind of not everyone's dead, and it's like oh, and then they may all, and it's like oh no, everything's screwed. They really have to reset. It's like
Yeah.
it's really nuts. Yeah, as you mentioned in Clockwork Vendettas, they're doing so well in contenders. It's like it makes me wonder because and this is something we can talk about is the 222 enforcement that is rumored to happen going forward. If this comp will even still work with that. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean, like we mentioned, like I mentioned, the primary way that's built is with 3 DPS and then just the Mercy.
mhm.
But it has the theoretical possibility of swapping out that like sniper role for something like an Ana, which has like a lower cap sniper capability. Obviously, it's putting out less damage than something like Hanzo or Widow because it doesn't have like the one kill headshot,
Mhm.
one shot kill headshot capability
Right.
that something like Hanzo or Widow has. But it works in 222 lock. And there are very few compositions right now that work well in 222 lock. It's mostly compositions built around Orisa Hog because you have those two work like have great synergy together.
Mhm.
There's some weird like goats plus pharmacy setups that work well, but a lot of those even just still play the solo Mercy.
Mhm.
So maybe something like goats, but instead of Brig Diva, you play Sombra, Farah, and then for the supports you play Ana Mercy. Something like that could be
Yeah. Yeah.
common. Like
Yeah.
those are really the only two compositions that I can see working are because with ball you want to play heavy DPS and usually one support. You don't really necessarily want a second tank if you're playing ball. And even like Winston, like you could see potentially Winston goats with some kind of like pharmacy setup. But that's pretty much it. It's going to be like weird goats pharmacy hybrids or a Clockwork with Ana instead of sniper is my guess.
Yeah. So I guess it's like it's interesting because it feels like these teams have not practiced this in a while, and the game has been going further and further from it. But if it's
Mhm.
enforced, maybe you will see some brand new Clockwork esque, goats type of composition that's like the new meta. But at this point, I feel like it's a little bit hard to imagine. But I guess even beyond that, I'm wondering what you think of sort of the implication of is it Blizzard trying to just have the game, shy away from goats, which sometimes isn't necessarily as entertaining, especially for people who aren't as fluent with Overwatch and don't know, um, the very small intricacies that goats sort of contains or what? Do you think this is Blizzard sort of resisting that and being more like we have all of these characters, let's play them all, and what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's very strange timing given that a
Mm,
lot of teams this stage have been experimenting with a lot of DPS based compositions. And you could say maybe it's like them like preparing for this potential stage 4 222 luck if like the teams know that this is happening. And it seems like the teams do know that this is happening because it was leaked from Fisher when he retired. That's where this like rumor slash leak slash whatever you want to call it. So like the teams, like assuming it's happening, the teams would know it's happening ahead of time. So maybe they're playing these, like maybe it's like the chicken and egg is backwards. So that like, you know, the teams are playing these competitions now in stage 3 so they can prepare for having to play more DPS based competitions in stage 4, like by necessity. I think it's an interesting timing. I think that going into stage 3 after the All-Star break probably would have been a more natural time to do this, because at this point, like 3/4 of the season is over. Most of like the playoff slots, except for kind of like the fighting for that like 10 to 14 range, is pretty much locked in at this point.
Yeah.
And we're gonna be like sending these teams that were at the top in 3 stages of basically goats into season playoffs where they're being forced to play different competitions. And like that could be interesting, but it's also kind of strange where we're like, okay, we've established that these are the best teams at GOATS by having them play it for 3 stages. And now we're going to put them into the season playoffs and they are not allowed to play GOATS.
Yeah. It's at least from my personal opinion, it feels very anti-Overwatch. It feels anti what the game is all about, which is you have all of these heroes, you can do anything with them. But yeah, it is very strange because, especially the timing, it's like, you know, you've established these teams, like you said, who are the best at what they do. And I mean, if anything, I guess it shows that, you know, the best teams need to be well-rounded. That's why in my mind NYXL is still top, you know, 2. In my mind they're almost like top 1, because we've only seen so much from like Titans, we've seen so much GOATs, and even, you know, San Francisco, like this has been like the season of GOATs. So it's in my head, it's like I feel like New York could still beat these guys if the 2-2-2 wasn't enforced. I don't know. Now, the second point that I want to bring up is what this means for us as players. You know, it feels like they should have like play tested this with us first and then implemented it into Overwatch League. I don't know, that to me that's like, it's really odd how they're doing it in this way where that is if they do make it so that, you know, if you're playing in comp mode you have to play 2-2-2. That would be, I don't know. I don't think I would like it. What do you think?
It depends how they do it on like the comp ladder, because like most people have like a certain role that they play, either tank, DPS, or support at the very least. So like, you know, you're primarily a tank player. I'm primarily a support player. So like, I can play most of the support heroes competently, but like I can only play like 1 or 2 DPS and 1 or 2 tanks competently, and like at like a comparable level to like my worst support heroes. So like if I'm in a situation where I'm put into a 2-2-2 lock, or like even still with like the way that ranked ladder works, like luckily like support roles are usually open when I queue, but like you know, even if I'm put into a situation where you know, there are like 4 support mains and, you know, we're all fighting over those 2 support main slots in the 2-2-2 lock, or, you know, obviously more likely is it's 4 DPS mains all fighting over 2 DPS in the 2-2-2 lock, then that's not great. I think that if there is a way for you to queue, like we need to have role queue, so you have to be able to say, I'm a support main, I want to queue as a support player, and then the matchmaking puts together 2 tank players, 2 support players, and 2 DPS players. And then like if you're mostly a main tank and you have to flex to off tank, that's not a huge deal, right? So that's the first thing they need to do. And the second thing they need to do is have at least behind the scenes different SR per role. So like if you're like a plat support player and like a silver tank and like a bronze DPS player, right? You want to like if you're going to role queue as support, then like it should put you with like much higher ranked players. But then if you like
Definitely.
want to screw around and you want to role queue as tank, like you shouldn't be you shouldn't be playing a role that you're like terrible at with like average players like at the other roles. So it's like there's a way to do it well. And I think that if they do it well, it could be fine, and it could probably
Mm-hmm.
fix a lot of issues that exist within comp right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we'll see. It's totally possible they screw it up and they just do exactly what we have now with comp, but like roll lock 2-2-2, and it's like that doesn't actually solve anything.
Yeah, and I feel like they are gonna do that at least to start, but obviously we don't
Yeah.
know yet. But I do completely agree that you would need different SRs for each rank, and it's like if you know depending on the system, if you just get put into a game and you are a tank as I am, and there isn't a tank role to be filled, you shouldn't lose SR for like your thing if you lose because you're forced to play DPS and like it almost to me it seems like they're not helping the toxicity problem that Overwatch is somewhat known for. Whereas I can completely see people in the chat being like, "Well, I'm not a DPS," or "Well, I'm not a tank, so you can't blame me." And it's like I don't know. It like I said, it feels anti what Overwatch is by nature. Um, and the other thing to keep in mind is that the pros and us, they're like the 0.1%. They're the 1% of the 1%. They're so incredibly good that it's a different game altogether. Having them lock into 2-2-2 would be an interesting experiment for sure, and we would see some interesting comps and some interesting experiments. But locking, normal people essentially into it feels a little bit just restrictive and maybe not so good. At least that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's like it's tricky. I think that the motivation in each case is different, right? The motivation for locking 2-2-2 for pros is to try and make the product for the fans more interesting and
Mm-hmm.
by like there's a concept in like game design where if you like limiting the decisions and the space for like players actually like increases the like the potential creative space, which is it's kind of like
Interesting.
a
Yeah.
paradox, right? Where you like by limiting uh, your options, it makes you be more creative,
Mm-hmm.
and so like that's kind of like the what seems to be motivation for limiting to 2-2-2 in professional play, and whereas the motivation in competitive play seems to be what you mentioned or you kind of implied, which is the toxicity of ladder and the parts of the ladder experience that are not fun, which is when you're forced to play a role that you aren't comfortable playing, or you're
Mm-hmm.
not like competent at the like SR that you're currently at because of you're queuing in with like five DPS players and a tank, and two of the DPS players at the very least have to be flexing to roles that they aren't comfortable on because they're like Widow one tricks.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And it's also, I mean, this is something I've been thinking about how the game feels pretty balanced now. You look back like a year ago and Torb was like, if you pick Torb, you're like throwing, there were certain heroes people just didn't play because they weren't like good, or, Brigitte was like way too buffed. And as it currently stands, things feel pretty even. I don't know. Maybe that's actually in favor of 2-2-2. Who knows? But yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting going forward, and it feels like it's going to change the game in a big way. But I guess let's jump back to Overwatch League and talk about the playoffs. So yeah, so let's take a look. So okay, so we'll start with Houston versus Vancouver. I feel like Vancouver's gonna take this, but Houston they've been looking pretty good, and they beat San Francisco before, so it's not entirely impossible that they lose this.
Yeah, and I mean Vancouver lost to Valiant, so like I
Mm-hmm.
mean it is the Valiant are in this playoffs, but it's not necessarily likely that Vancouver and Valiant will see each other again. But
Mm-hmm.
it does show that Vancouver are conquerable by a team like Houston if they like have their crap together and like play at the top of their game. So it'll be fun to watch. I mean, obviously, I think Vancouver are heavily favored, probably like 80-20,
Mm.
85-15, 90-10, somewhere in that
Yeah.
range. But like still, it's there's still a possibility of that upset. But yeah, I mean, I'm obviously gonna vote. I'm gonna assume that Vancouver is the likely winner.
Yeah, so I would definitely put my money on Vancouver as well. And then we have Shanghai versus NYXL, which I would also put my money on NYXL. I feel like that would be a safe bet. But do you think there's a
Yeah,
chance Shanghai takes this?
I mean, NYXL are like they're notably choke artists in the playoffs, right? So and
Yeah.
Shanghai has been performing well. I mean, they did they obviously lost to the Charge this past week, but like they've been looking pretty relatively consistent otherwise, and they have a wide array of competitions that they're competent at. So it'll hopefully be at least a fun match.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And then let's jump to Friday. Seoul versus San Francisco Shock. What do you think about this? San Francisco has not been looking too strongly. I feel like people have kind of figured out, the little holes in their in their team. It's
Little EMP shaped holes.
yeah, yeah, it's a good way to put it. So do you think Seoul has a chance?
I mean, Seoul does have. I mean, depending on what lineup they're. I mean, I think that Michelle, as an example, is certainly the kind of player who on Sombra could potentially tear apart the Shock. It'll be interesting to see in kind of this more Sombra based meta if the
Mm-hmm.
Shock is trying to force Soul onto goats and if they acquiesce but play one of their two Sombra players on the Sombra. Shock have definitely had issues with that. And it seems like as the meta has moved away from just goats mirrors, the Shock have, as you said, had some, some issues. So it'll
Mm-hmm.
be probably a close match. But I mean, the Shock were in both past stage two finals against Vancouver. They won the stage two playoffs. So like I mean, it still seems like a bad move to bet against the Shock at this point. They've shown time and time
Yeah.
again that they're capable of pulling it out when it matters.
Yeah, definitely. And then second match that day is LA Valiant versus Hangzhou Spark. Now this feels pretty even, or at least I don't have like a clear winner coming out of this. I guess if I had to choose, I would say Valiant because they've been looking really strong, but Hangzhou as well has been looking pretty strong this stage. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think this has definitely been Hangzhou's. I mean, this has been both of these teams' best stage, but I think
Mm,
Hangzhou especially are on an upward trajectory that could potentially put them in contention for being that number 4 team. It's kind of either them or the Gladiators at this point, and the
mm-hmm.
Gladiators aren't even in this playoff, so they kind of barely missed out on that. So I think that we could potentially look at if we want to talk about the 1, 2, 3, 4 teams in the league right now, being Vancouver, New York, San Francisco, Hangzhou. I think that
Mm,
those are really my picks. I mean, the Valiant have been performing well. Fact Fiction has been a great pickup. Shax has been a great pickup.
yeah.
They've just had just a ton of success. So I mean, I can't necessarily write them off. They are coming off of an upset against the Titans. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm. I guess my final question is, well, you did mention before the show you think it'll be Vancouver versus San Francisco Shock in the end. Is this all for show, and it's just going to be a rematch?
Yeah, yeah. Owl is an anime. It's all scripted, and we're gonna get take three. So it's gonna be like the best 2 out of 3 situation before
Yeah,
we get to the season playoffs. I mean, I don't know. It seems like just such a bad idea to bet against that, right? It's like that seems to be the like assumed outcome.
yeah,
And like if something else happens, that's really cool, and we'll see something different, and we'll see two different, or at least one different team in the stage finals. But I think that it's just going to probably come down to Vancouver versus the Shock, and I think in this meta it could be really interesting to see what happens with that. I think we could
totally.
see Stitch come in for Vancouver if they want to try and take advantage of the Shock being a little less good against Sombra, or even I'm not sure has Janu. I don't think Janu's flexed Sombra. I think they mostly put in Stitch instead of
Mm.
Janu so that they could play Stitch on the Sombra. But yeah, I mean, I think we're just heading towards that. What do you think?
It's so hard to say. I mean, this stage has honestly been one of the most fun this season, just because it's been such a change for a lot of these teams. I mean, Houston Outlaws, I did not think they were going to be in the playoffs.
We're Valiant.
Yeah, or even Valiant, honestly. I mean, stage one, they had 0 wins.
Mm-hmm.
So it to me, it's like the overarching theme of this stage has been like, the teams that have made the right changes and are adapting seem to be doing really well, as we can see from these lineups. And the teams that maybe are a little more stubborn don't seem to be doing as well. I mean, even look at San Francisco, who we were like zero losses most of the season, and then they ended up losing some games. It's like, yeah, you have to keep in mind that Overwatch is that sort of game. You really have to keep adapting. There's no definitive win all. Luckily, Goats is not that forever. So yeah, it's tough to call. Too tough to call right now.
Yeah, no, it'll be fun to watch. I'm excited to talk about it after it's all done next week.
Definitely.
We'll have a little break after that before heading into the final stage of the season.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I guess we'll see you all next week. Thank you so much for watching. I really look forward to discussing these stage playoffs next week. So make sure to like the video, subscribe if you haven't. Check out the rest of our stuff. We've been on an upward trajectory lately, gaining a lot of subs. And yeah, we're just so happy that people are joining the family, and we have a lot of great content coming out soon, including podcasts and Let's Plays and news updates on nerd culture and comics and video games and everything like that. And make sure to follow Ben on Twitter at Ben Sharon, and follow Brian at the Fake BMar. Thank you everybody for watching, and I guess we'll see you next week. Take care.